If 2023 is proving anything, it's that two things are making a major critical comeback: the Saw movie franchise and licensed video games. And it just so happens that in the year of our Lord 2009, we were blessed with a crossover between these two titans of media. Saw, the video game. Now, in my last video, which has been cruelly claimed by Lionsgate, and therefore John Kramer himself, I mentioned games that are Saw-like, but not official Saw games themselves. A few times in that I mentioned the official game, but most of my comments in that were based on parts of the game I'd seen played years ago, or pieces of reviews from other people. I figured I may as well give it a shot myself and give it a fair chance. And no, this is not some elaborate ruse to re-monetize my other Saw video. I'm not gonna lie about how good the game is just to get Lionsgate back on my side. Let's start by looking at the developer, Zombie Studios. The developer was commissioned by the United States Armed Forces to co-develop a series of training and recruitment games. Some games were developed entirely by the developer, but some were co-developed with US Army Development Team and others were made with other game developers. Such games include America's Army, Special Forces, Future Force, Company Commander, Virtual Army Experience, AH-64D Apache Simulator, Future Soldier Trainer, Convoy Trainer, and JROTC First Aid Trainer. Now, like I said, I'm not gonna lie to try and get Lionsgate back onto my side, but I absolutely will lie to get the full might of the US military behind me. Buy Saw the video game, it's really quite good. You know, this does answer a long-pondered question about the Saw movie franchise. How does Jigsaw afford all of these elaborate traps? Well, I'll tell you. $1.8 trillion of taxpayer money. Anyway, getting into the actual game itself, the opening menu is genuinely pretty interesting. It looks like a Saw setting, so that's something. And that's a running theme throughout the entire game. Visually, it's actually pretty good, at least in terms of the environments. Not only is it very good at capturing the abandoned structure turned death trap look, but on the PC version that I played, it scaled surprisingly well. I've seen the console version, and that's like looking at a strange Garry's Mod rendition of a Telltale game, but the PC version actually looks kind of fine. For 2009, granted, but honestly, it's visually on par with a lot of indie horror games from the mid to late 2010s. And I mean that in a good way. For once. That being said, the visuals aren't exactly perfect. It was a game from the 2000s, so they were contractually obligated to add absurd amounts of bloom, and being a Saw game, it has a shitload of insane visual effects, including, my least favorite of all, the flash to white transition. I don't really want to have to explain to my optician that my retinas were blown out by a cutscene in Saw the video game. So going back to the main menu, there's a Saw 6 button. Why is there a Saw 6 button? Well, if I press it and show you, they'll take another video from me, so just trust me. It's a trailer built into this game, and it's a trailer for what is the best Saw movie, which is funny because it's got absolutely nothing to do with this game whatsoever. Because this game takes place shortly after the events of Saw 1, though that's not really relevant because the chronology of Saw is completely fucked. There are lists out there that try and put them in chronological order, but I'm yet to see one that actually gets it right. Because none of them seem to include the incredible number of flashbacks that the series has. Sure, just looking at the main stories, it looks like this, but including Saw 6's flashbacks alone, it looks like this. I've known people to have trouble listing the Star Wars movies and shows in chronological order. Humanity has no chance of getting this fully right. If you want to know the viewing order of them, however, it's very easy. Watch them in release order. It's the same for everything. Don't force a chronological order. They weren't meant to be viewed that way. Stop it. Anyway, that aside, there is a bigger problem with the chronology of this game in particular. That being that our character, Detective David Tapp, is, spoilers, dead. The biggest thing he does in the first film is die, or near enough. He gets shot in the chest. But don't worry, he got better, and now he's stuck in a Saw game that is so much bigger than more elaborate than anything in any of the movies. Jigsaw pulled out all the stops to torment a dead man using an entire abandoned asylum and filling almost every room with some kind of lethal peril and capturing and enslaving enough Americans to make international news. Thanks again to the US military for sponsoring this project. As Detective David Tapp, we have one goal: find the identity of the Jigsaw killer. And we're really bad at it, though the game does start on a good note. This note being stuck in the iconic reverse bear trap, and this, my friends, is the only time in the entire game we are actually in a trap. With only 2 or 3 buttons, we complete the mandatory checklist for a Saw video game, and then we move into a strange series of flash game puzzles and the worst combat you will ever see. Yes, that's literally the only one. Unless, of course, you count rooms where you get locked in and gassed while you have to solve a pipe puzzle, or rooms where you get to watch other people in traps while you solve a pipe puzzle, or chairs in which you get strapped down and watch while somebody else gets tortured as you do a pipe puzzle. Again, I'm begging for somebody to make a Five Nights at Freddy's or the Room-style Saw game where you navigate traps. It's such a solid basis for that. Just reskin those games and you're basically there anyway. But no, we have this instead. And yeah, I mentioned combat. There is certainly combat, and it's about as good as it looks. Honestly, it's one of the most all-over-the-place combat systems I've ever seen in a game, and it's not one of those ones like Thief that has combat as an option that is largely dissuaded. Every Thief fan on Earth just had a palpitation after hearing somebody compare it to Saw, the video game. But no, combat here is absolutely mandatory. Yes, Mr. Jigsaw doesn't kill people, but he does force them into gladiatorial combat where one of them must die. He also claims videos on YouTube. But the combat is very simple on the surface level. You get weapons with a durability counter that goes down every time you hit somebody, and if you hit a guy before they hit you, they get staggered and you're basically guaranteed the win. Of course, this also works the other way around, and while there is a blocking mechanic, it doesn't work. I don't know if it's something to do with the PC version or whatever, but I think of every 10 blocks I tried, one worked. The rest of the time I just had to run away from the enemies instead and trick them into missing me. And of course, when you do successfully block an enemy, it goes into this peculiar quick time event parry riposte system. It's like Dark Souls parrying, but nothing like it. I just figured I'd give some palpitations to the Souls fans as well. And some enemies don't even attack you, but it's very inconsistent as to which ones do and which ones don't. Sometimes David Tapp just stabs a man to death for absolutely no reason and you're left feeling a little bit like an asshole. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are enemies that the game desperately tries to warn you about, treating them like they're these big boss enemies. But the tactic with every single one in the game is the same. Hit them. The game is littered with barricades and traps that you can use to kill off or delay enemies, but they are so pointless. Just beat the shit out of everyone. I used a barricade maybe once, and all that did was make an enemy glare at me through a window until I had to let him in to progress. As for the weapons are offered, there's a lot of improvised weapons, pipes, crutches, bats, etc. But there is one that is far and above better than any of the others. Fists. Genuinely, the greatest weapon in the game is having no weapon at all. Remember what I said about hitting an enemy first and automatically winning? Well, the fists annihilate everyone based on the fact that their attacks are the fastest. There are weapons locked behind puzzles and whatnot throughout the game, and I lost way too much time trying to get to them before I realized that the human knuckles are the most powerful force on Earth. I mean, there's also a gun. That's probably the only exception to the fist rule now that I think about it, but realistically the gun is actually only better when you're far away from the enemy. Close up, your cheeky little paws still win every single time. But the gun does have the bonus of being absolutely hilarious. There's a few times in the game where an enemy will be introduced in a little cutscene where they're throwing Molotovs or whatever at you from a distance. Seconds later, you one-shot them before they have a chance to move. It's absolutely incredible. So if anybody wants an update on the meta for Saw the video game, find a gun and carry it forever. Drop it when there's melee combat, and if you run out of ammo, you're not punching enough. I mean, that is until near the end of the game when they throw a pig mask bandit at you, one of Jigsaw's very own henchmen. It's interesting because that means Jigsaw literally offered to sacrifice one of his closest followers' lives for the sake of Detective Tapp, a man who is already dead. But yeah, this guy's fucked. I think you can kill him via normal means, but realistically you're only going to be able to do it by locking him in some insane electricity cage. It's also the only time in the game where I found barricades to actually be helpful, as I had to kite him around for a while to lure him into the lightning box. I'm glad the barricades were a mechanic throughout the entire thing though. It was great practice for one encounter. Outside of the trap minigames and the utterly draining combat encounters, your biggest threats are all in the environment itself. Well, what are these threats? Glass, gas, and tripwires. The glass is introduced to you very early and litters most of the game. I'm at risk of becoming one of those channels that describes every game mechanic in excruciating detail, so I'll refrain from that and instead let you imagine what shattered glass does to Detective Tapp, a man that famously lacks shoes. The gas is also all over the place too. You'll get locked in a room and gas will be pumped in and... yeah, you can probably imagine what that does to Detective Tapp, a man that famously breathes. And finally, the tripwires, also known as the reason for 90% of Earth's woes. I fucking hate these things. They are near everywhere. All of them are instant kills. They're almost impossible to see, and I played at 1080p on PC. I can only imagine how frustrating they were 14 years ago on consoles. I just wonder how absolutely gut-wrenching it must be for John Kramer to be sitting watching these elaborate torture games play out, only for your subject, who you have presumably spent thousands of dollars on, to step onto one of 8,000 shotgun traps and die immediately. How anticlimactic would that be? Why did he put these everywhere? What are they teaching people? Another thing Jigsaw puts absolutely everywhere are destructible walls. Why? I have no idea. They may not even be intentional, but a lot of the time your only way to progress is to break a wall open with your weapon, or better yet, your fists.
Meet the cop that can't be stopped.
Okay, going back to the actual story, we spent most of our time as Detective Tapp trying to save other people from Jigsaw's traps, and then we grill them about what Jigsaw looks like. Genuinely, it's all Tapp ever goes on about. All of the people that Tapp has to save are people that he has, in one way or another, inconvenienced or been inconvenienced by. There's a sensationalist journalist, a corrupt cop, a bereaved spouse, a janitor, a Jedi Master, and Amanda. Who's Amanda, you ask? Well, she's one of Jigsaw's most trusted lieutenants, and if the creators of the game had watched any of the films after the first, they would have realized that shoving her in another trap doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And of course, in order to save these people, we must do minigames. Some of the traps have unique minigames. A lot of them do not. For at least 3 of them, you just have to do more of the same pipe and or gear minigames that are littered throughout the entire asylum, so they really don't feel special at all. And even the more unique games just feel like mobile games from the early 2010s. Once again, Saw the video game was well ahead of its time. The traps that people are put in are grossly unbalanced as well. Some make sense, like the ex-addict Amanda being hooked up to a chemical device, but then there are others like the poor janitor. Honestly, this poor man. The puzzle to save him is one of those stupid memory games, and every time you fail it, which you will because it's almost entirely trial and error, an iron bar spears through part of his body. It's brutal. And his crime? Being a witness and being traumatized. That's it. Saving him means beating the minigame and somehow he doesn't immediately bleed to death after being made more whole than man. He seems fine though, and almost every time you save someone, and once you're done interrogating them, they follow you around for a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean literal seconds. When I played, I caught on to this pattern and started holding my breath whenever I gained a companion. Not once did I start to struggle before they were killed off or just straight up abandoned me. Now, not all of the characters are peculiar and non-committal. One character in the game stands head and shoulders above the rest. And of course it's Jigsaw. They actually got Tobin Bell in to voice him for the game, so that means he's automatically the best part of it. Honestly, I can't tell you how much I love this man. There's a lot of very iconic horror villains out there. Freddy, Jason, Freddy, Michael, Pennywise, Matthew Lillard, but none of them come close to Jigsaw for me. A weak, terminally ill, aging man, and he is far and away the most intimidating. And that's almost entirely down to Tobin Bell. I've said that I love the Saw franchise in the past, but I truly believe it would be nothing without him. That's why they kept bringing him back. He is the franchise. So it's a real shame that this game and its sequel are his only video game credits. I do wish that they'd used him a little bit more sparingly in the game though, which is strange because my complaints about a lot of the Saw films is that they didn't use him enough. But in this, every time you walk through a door, it locks behind you with a loud buzz and then Jigsaw starts talking about some other way you've completely fucked up everything in your life. Okay, maybe not every door, but almost every door. Genuinely. It's insane if you play the game in one sitting. Anyway, once you've saved everyone and killed 500 people, innocent or otherwise, you're given a choice. Either continue your Jigsaw obsession and fall for a very obvious trap which will drive you insane, or give up on your obsession and end up taking your own life. You know, these endings aren't great, but it does offer one of the only looks into Jigsaw's flawed philosophy. He claims to be fixing people, but he ends up traumatizing them. The ones that themselves claim to be fixed end up just hurting other people, and the ones that succeed and reject his philosophy are near irreparably damaged. I don't imagine they thought about that when they made this game though, because they clearly didn't watch past the first film. I do apologize, this has been one of my less structured videos, but that's because the script writing process for this has very much been jumping from one tangent to another that's directly or closely related, so going forward, here are some other things about the game that I couldn't really fit in elsewhere. There are 2 lock-picking minigames in Saw the video game. One of them is fine, again, it's like a 2012 mobile game, but the other lock-picking minigame, which for some bizarre reason only applies to medical cabinets and nothing else, sucks. It's this horrible thing where you have to time these rotating discs to click into place, and every time you click one into place it speeds up the others. You can tell how much I don't like this minigame. It made my voice break while talking about it. Fuck it, I'll keep it in. But it's not even like you necessarily need to do any of the lockpicking, because the resources in the game are placed with little to no relevance to the player's situation. There are dozens more weapons than there are enemies, and again, you only ever need your fists. They give you loads of healing items, but you can only carry so many, so you'll basically always be at the limit, and there are trap components you can use to craft stuff, but there's only a handful of crafting tables, and again, punching is the only thing you actually need. Then there are like 3 different kinds of lighting items which you can use. There's a lighter, which barely works, a camera with flash, which is just seizure inducing, and a flashlight. There's no durability on these items, so once you get the flashlight, there is literally no reason to use the others. Unless you want to use Molotov cocktails, which, yes, exist in the game, then you'll need to use the lighter. But again, punching and or gun will solve all of your issues. And then finally, the guy who wrote the first 3 Saw movies and played Adam Stanheight in the first one has a genuine dislike for Scottish comedian and streamer Brian Limond. They really don't like each other. That's nothing to do with the game, I just find that hilarious. Anyway, if you want to see my live reactions to playing this game for the first time, there's a video that's about an hour long available to all of my patrons, which is the edited down highlights from that. A 10-minute preview is available over on Painticus Highlights if you want to see that, but otherwise I don't have much more to say about this. It's a peculiar game that exists in that strange 2000s void of licensed games that really had no reason to exist. The plot is odd, the puzzles are tedious, the combat is esoteric and about as odd and tedious as the other parts, and Tobin Bell absolutely kills it. In a good way. Although one other thing did actually stick out to me. In my last video I talked about the Outlast Trials, and I said that game was about the closest thing we could get to a proper Saw game. And playing this, that thought was just reinforced. I first noticed it when looking at the character concept art, where the enemy designs were shockingly similar to Outlast's. Then there's the game's level aesthetics, one of its strongest parts, which the Outlast Trials really just perfects. There are even some references in in-game notes to MKUltra experiments, which is peculiar given that there's no reference to MKUltra in the rest of the Saw series, but that's basically what the Outlast Trials is about. So yeah, if this game looks at all appealing to you, save yourself the trouble of dealing with its major problems and play the Outlast Trials instead. It's brilliant. It does lack Tobin Bell, however, so it's not as good as it could be. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support the channel, head over to my Patreon and get access to things like my edited Saw playthrough highlights, which is actually the only exclusive thing up there right now, but there will be more in the future. Special thanks to those who are already supporting me there, especially those on the $10 tier. Ernst the Ace, the original Tex-Mex, and Untrusted Life. You can also catch me live on Twitch. I stream all kinds of things, but usually stick to the spooky stuff. I'll be next streaming either the day after or the day this is uploaded, the 1st of November. Depends how quickly I can work. But yes, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time, where I'll be covering something a little bit different. Bye-bye.